The diner was chaos incarnate at 7 in the morning. Orders shouted across the kitchen, plates clattering. The espresso machine hissing like an angry animal. The smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee thick enough to choke on. And Lauren was drowning in the middle of it all. She had been on her feet for 6 hours straight. Her shift was supposed to end at 6, but Marcus, the other server, had called in sick again, which meant she was stuck covering both sections of the diner. Her lower back screamed with every step. Her hands trembled from exhaustion and too much caffeine. The headache that had started at 4 in the morning was now a steady, pulsing throb behind her eyes. But she couldn't stop. Couldn't slow down. Not when rent was due in 3 days and she was still $200 short. Not when her landlord had already threatened eviction twice this month. Not when stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering how close she was to losing everything. So she kept moving, kept smiling, kept pretending she wasn't one bad day away from a complete breakdown. "Table 7 needs a refill," barked Glenn from behind the counter. His grease-stained apron stretched tight across his gut. He didn't look up from the grill, didn't care that Lauren was barely holding it together. He never did. "Got it," she called back, grabbing the coffee pot with one hand and balancing 3 plates on her other arm. Her body moved on autopilot now, muscle memory taking over where her exhausted brain couldn't keep up. She delivered the plates to table 4, a family with 2 screaming toddlers who'd already spilled syrup all over the booth. She forced a smile, refilled their waters, and turned toward table 7. That's when she saw him. He sat alone in the corner booth, partially hidden by the morning light streaming through the grimy windows. Everything about him was out of place in this rundown diner. The tailored black suit that probably cost more than Lauren made in 6 months. The polished Italian leather shoes. The way he sat, perfectly still, perfectly composed, like he was attending a board meeting instead of sitting in a 24-hour diner that smelled like old grease and desperation. His dark hair was combed back, revealing a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes, God, those eyes, dark and intense and focused entirely on the newspaper spread before him. Lauren's heart did an uncomfortable flip. Men like that didn't come to places like this. Men like that had personal chefs and 5-star restaurants and penthouses with views that made you forget what the ground looked like. But there he was, in her section, waiting for a coffee refill. She took a breath, straightened her stained apron, and approached his table. "Good morning. Coffee?" He looked up slowly, and when his eyes met hers, something in her chest tightened. They were the darkest eyes she'd ever seen, not just brown, but deep, almost black, like looking into still water at midnight. And they were watching her with an intensity that made her forget, just for a second, how tired she was. "Please," he said quietly. His voice was low, smooth, with the kind of control that suggested he never had to raise it to be heard. Lauren nodded and reached for his cup. Her hands were shaking, from exhaustion, from too much caffeine, from the way he was looking at her like she was something worth studying. She tried to steady herself, tried to focus, but her body had other plans. It happened in slow motion. The coffee pot tilted too far. Hot, dark liquid arced through the air. And before Lauren could do anything, before she could move, before she could breathe, before she could process what was happening, the entire contents of the pot splashed directly across the front of his immaculate suit. The diner seemed to freeze. Lauren stood there, coffee pot still in her trembling hand, staring in absolute horror at the spreading brown stain across his chest. His lap, his pristine white shirt beneath the suit jacket. Steam rose from the fabric. Coffee dripped onto the table, onto the floor, onto his newspaper. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her brain screamed 1,000 apologies, 1,000 excuses, 1,000 desperate pleas not to get fired, but her voice had completely abandoned her. This was it. This was the moment her terrible day became a catastrophic one. This was the moment she lost her job, the moment she couldn't make rent, the moment everything fell completely apart. And this man, this clearly wealthy, clearly important man in his clearly expensive suit, was going to make sure of it. She waited for the explosion, for the anger. For him to stand up and demand to see her manager, to threaten a lawsuit, to tear into her the way people like him always did when people like her made mistakes they couldn't afford to make. But he didn't move. He just sat there, looking down at the coffee soaking through his suit, his expression completely unreadable. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating, broken only by the continued chaos of the diner around them, chaos that suddenly felt very far away. Finally, he looked up at her. And he wasn't angry. Lauren blinked, confused. She'd seen anger before. Had it directed at her more times than she could count. She knew what it looked like. The flared nostrils, the tight jaw, the eyes that went cold and hard and cruel. But this man's eyes weren't cold. They weren't hard. They were curious. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with that same intense focus he'd given his newspaper. His gaze moved from her eyes to her trembling hands, to the coffee pot she was still holding like a weapon, back to her face. "I'm so sorry," Lauren finally managed to choke out, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I'll pay for a new suit. It's fine," he said quietly. Lauren stared at him. What? It's fine." He reached for a napkin and dabbed at his jacket with movements so calm, so unbothered. It was like getting drenched in scalding coffee was something that happened to him every day. "Accidents happen! But your suit is just fabric?" He looked up at her again, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Are you all right? Was she all right?" Was she all right? She just destroyed what was probably a $5,000 suit and he was asking if she was all right? Yes. No. She couldn't form a coherent sentence. Her brain had short-circuited somewhere between the coffee spill and his completely inexplicable reaction. "I should get towels. And I need to tell my manager. He'll want to comp your meal, and that won't be necessary." The man set down the napkin and leaned back in the booth, seemingly unconcerned about the coffee still soaking through his clothes. "I'd rather you didn't tell your manager." Lauren's confusion deepened. "But you're exhausted," he said, and it wasn't a question. His dark eyes swept over her again, not in the way men usually looked at her, not with that predatory assessment she'd learned to recognize and avoid. This was different, clinical, almost. Like he was cataloging details. "How long have you been working?" The question caught her off guard. What? Your shift. How long?" 6 hours, she admitted before she could stop herself. "But that's not an excuse." "I should have been more careful. I should have..." 6 hours without a break? "We're short-staffed." That's not an answer. Lauren didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know why this stranger was asking her questions instead of demanding compensation. Didn't know why he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. "Look." She tried again, her voice stronger now despite the exhaustion weighing on every word. "I really am sorry. That suit is expensive and I ruined it, and I understand if you want to. I want you to sit down." She blinked. "What? Sit down?" He gestured to the seat across from him. "Before you fall down." "I can't. I'm working." "I have other tables. They can wait." There was something in his tone now, something that wasn't quite a command, but felt impossible to disobey. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was so completely certain. Like the idea that she might refuse simply hadn't occurred to him. And maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the shock of his reaction. Maybe it was the way he was looking at her. Really looking at her. Like she was a person instead of just a waitress who'd made a mistake. But Lauren found herself sliding into the booth across from him. Sitting felt dangerous. Not because of him, though there was something undeniably intense about being this close to a man who radiated the kind of quiet power that made the air feel heavier. But because sitting meant stopping and stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant acknowledging just how close to the edge she really was. Her legs throbbed with relief the moment her weight left them. Her back screamed in gratitude. But her mind raced with panic. What was she doing? She couldn't just sit here with a customer. Glenn would lose his mind if he saw her. She'd already spilled coffee all over this man's expensive suit. And now she was breaking protocol by sitting in a booth during her shift like some kind of breathe, the man said quietly. Lauren's eyes snapped to his. What? You're not breathing. His gaze was steady, calm, almost hypnotic. Breathe. She hadn't even realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, the air leaving her lungs in a rush that made her feel lightheaded. Better, he said, and there was the faintest hint of approval in his voice. They sat in silence for a moment. The diner continued its morning chaos around them. Orders being called, dishes clattering, conversations overlapping in a cacophony of sound that somehow felt muted now, like they were in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Lauren couldn't stop staring at the coffee stains spreading across his suit. It looked even worse now that it was starting to set. The fabric was definitely ruined. There was no way dry cleaning could fix that. I really am sorry, she said again, quieter this time. I know. He hadn't looked away from her face. But that's not why you're upset. The observation hit her like a slap. I don't. You're terrified, he continued, his voice still that same calm, measured tone. Not of me. Of losing your job. Of not being able to afford the consequences of a simple accident. He paused. Am I wrong? Lauren's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he didn't know anything about her or her life or what she was afraid of. But the words wouldn't come because he was right. Completely, devastatingly right. How did you? She started, but her voice cracked. I pay attention, he said simply. To waitresses who spill coffee on you? To people who are carrying more than they should. His eyes never left hers. You're running on fumes. Anyone with eyes can see that. I'm fine, Lauren said automatically, the lie so practiced it came out smooth despite everything. No, you're not. There was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. And you don't have to be. Not with me. Something about the way he said it, not with me, made her chest ache. She didn't even know this man's name. Didn't know why he was being kind when he had every right to be furious. Didn't know why he seemed to see straight through every defense she'd carefully constructed. Why are you being so nice? The question escaped before she could stop it. His expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile, but something softer than the neutral mask he'd been wearing. Is that unusual for you? Yes, the honesty surprised her. That's unfortunate. He leaned back slightly, his posture still impossibly composed despite the coffee-soaked suit. For what it's worth, I don't think kindness should be unusual. It should be expected. Well, it's not. Not in my world. Lauren gestured vaguely at the diner around them. People here don't have the luxury of being kind. They're too busy surviving. And you? His gaze intensified. Are you surviving, Lauren? Her name. He'd used her name. She glanced down at the name tag pinned to her stained apron and felt heat creep up her neck. Of course he knew her name. It was literally written on her chest. But the way he'd said it, low and careful, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth, made it sound different, important. I'm trying, she admitted, and the exhaustion in her voice was impossible to hide now. That's more honest than most people would be. He studied her for another long moment, and Lauren had the unnerving sensation of being catalogued, assessed, understood in a way that made her feel exposed. When does your shift end? Technically? An hour ago. Realistically? She glanced toward the kitchen where Glenn was barking orders at the cook. Whenever Glenn decides he doesn't need me anymore. And how often does he decide that at a reasonable time? Never. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was the first crack in his composed facade. The first sign that something had actually bothered him. But when he spoke, his voice was still calm. You're being taken advantage of. I'm being employed, Lauren corrected. There's a difference when you need the money. Need is not the same as deserve. He reached into his jacket pocket, moving carefully to avoid the wet fabric, and pulled out a slim black wallet. Water-resistant, probably, because of course someone like him would have a wallet that could survive a coffee catastrophe. How much do you make in a day? Wrong, a little dangerous. I appreciate it, but I can't just quit my job for some vague offer from a stranger I spilled coffee on. Then don't. He pulled a card from his wallet. Matte black, minimalist, with just a phone number embossed in silver, and slid it across the table. Think about it. Call me when you're ready to discuss details. Or don't call me at all. Either way, you have options now. Lauren stared at the card like it might bite her. Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you. You don't owe me anything. Sebastian stood, and even with coffee stains covering his suit, he moved with a grace that made Lauren's breath catch. Consider it paying forward a kindness someone once showed me. What kindness? Seeing me when I felt invisible. He looked at her one last time, and there was something in his eyes that made her chest ache. Recognition, understanding, connection. You remind me of that feeling. So I'm returning the favor. Before Lauren could respond, before she could process any of this, he turned and walked toward the door. Several patrons stared as he passed, this impeccably dressed man in a ruined suit, moving through the dingy diner like he owned it. Just before he reached the exit, he paused and looked back. And Lauren? You're not clumsy, you're exhausted. There's a difference. Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Lauren sat frozen in the booth, staring at the black card on the table. Her hands were still trembling. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was racing with 1,000 questions and 0 answers. Hey! Glenn's voice shattered her daze. What the hell are you doing sitting down? Table 9 needs their check. Lauren grabbed the card and shoved it into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing against the embossed numbers. She stood on shaking legs and went back to work. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt possibility. The rest of Lauren's shift passed in a blur of automatic movements and racing thoughts. She delivered plates without tasting what was on them. Refilled coffee cups without registering whether customers thanked her. Cleared tables while her mind replayed the conversation with Sebastian over and over, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to convince herself it had actually been real and not some exhaustion-induced hallucination. The card in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. She checked for it compulsively every few minutes, needing the physical confirmation that he'd actually given it to her. That the entire encounter hadn't been a stress dream her overtired brain had conjured up. You look like you've seen a ghost, remarked Deb, the other morning waitress who'd finally shown up 2 hours into Lauren's double shift. She was in her 50s, weathered by decades of service work, with kind eyes that had seen too much. You all right, honey? Fine, Lauren said automatically, carrying a stack of dirty plates to the kitchen. Just tired. Tired is when you need coffee. You look like you need a vacation and a winning lottery ticket. Deb followed her, lowering her voice. What happened? Glenn been on your ass again? No, it's not ... double quotes. Lauren set the plates down and turned to face her. The words came out before she could stop them. I spilled coffee on a customer. Deb's eyes widened. Oh, honey, did Glenn see? Are you in trouble? That's the thing. The customer ... He didn't get mad. He was ... double quotes. Lauren struggled to find the right word. Nice, really nice, almost too nice. Too nice how? Deb's expression turned suspicious in the way of a woman who'd learned to distrust kindness from strange men. Did he try something? No, nothing like that. He offered me a job. The kitchen went quiet except for the sizzle of the grill. Even the cook looked over, spatula frozen mid-flip. He what now? Deb said carefully. He said he owns businesses and that he could use someone like me and gave me his card. Lauren pulled it out of her pocket, showing Deb the simple black rectangle with its silver embossed number. Said to call him when I was ready to discuss details. Deb took the card, examining it with the thoroughness of someone checking for counterfeit bills. She turned it over, held it up to the light, ran her finger over the embossing. No name. No company. Just a number. His name is Sebastian, Lauren said. He told me that much. And what else did he tell you? About this job. Nothing, that's what's weird. He didn't give me any details. Just said he saw something in me that he valued. Lauren took the card back, tucking it safely into her pocket again. It's probably nothing. Probably some scam or maybe it's real, Deb interrupted. She gave Lauren a long measuring look. You've been working yourself to death here for 3 years, honey. 3 years of Glenn treating you like garbage, of customers treating you worse, of barely making rent even when you pull doubles. If some rich guy wants to offer you something better, maybe you should listen. But what if it's not? Deb's voice was firm. Look, I'm not saying trust him blindly. I'm saying don't dismiss a potential opportunity just because you're scared it's too good to be true. Sometimes good things happen to good people. And Lord knows you're overdue. Lauren wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, spilling coffee on a stranger could be the random act of chaos that changed her life instead of ruined it. But hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope set you up for disappointment. I'll think about it, she said finally. You do that. Deb patted her shoulder. And for what it's worth, I think you should call him. What's the worst that could happen? A lot, Lauren thought. A lot could happen. But she didn't say that out loud. The shift finally ended at 2 in the afternoon, 8 hours after it was supposed to. Lauren's feet felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. Her back had progressed from screaming to a dull, constant roar of pain. The headache that had started before dawn was now a full-scale migraine complete with light sensitivity and nausea. She changed out of her uniform in the dingy bathroom, catching sight of herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. She looked exactly how she felt. Pale, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide anymore. Her hair was falling out of the ponytail she'd pulled it into 12 hours ago. There was a coffee stain on her jeans from where she'd wiped her hands after the incident with Sebastian. She pulled out the card again, studying it in the harsh fluorescent light. The number gleamed silver against the matte black background. It was the kind of card that screamed money, power, importance. The kind of card that people like her didn't usually get handed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Rent reminder from her landlord. Past due. Final notice before eviction proceedings. Lauren stared at the message, then at the card, then back at the message. Deb's words echoed in her mind. What's the worst that could happen? Eviction, she thought. Homelessness. Living in her car again like she'd done 3 years ago when she'd first moved to the city with nothing but a duffel bag and a desperate need to escape her past. That was the worst that could happen if she didn't do something. If she didn't take a risk. If she let fear and caution keep her trapped in this barely surviving existence. But what if she called? What if Sebastian's offer was real? What if this was actually the break she'd been waiting for? The chance to pull herself out of the hole she'd been drowning in? What if hope wasn't dangerous this time? What if it was necessary? Lauren took a deep breath, pulled up her phone's keypad, and carefully entered the number from the card. Her finger hovered over the call button. This was insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know what he wanted, what kind of businesses he ran, what the job even was. For all she knew, he was involved in something illegal. Something dangerous, something that would make her current problems look like a vacation. But then she thought about the way he'd looked at her. Not with pity, not with condescension. Not with the predatory interest she'd learned to recognize and fear. He'd looked at her like she was a person. Like she mattered. Like she was capable of more than just surviving. No one had looked at her like that in a very long time. Lauren pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe he'd already forgotten about the exhausted waitress who'd ruined his suit. Maybe. Lauren. His voice was exactly as she remembered. Low, calm, certain. Like he'd been waiting for her call. Like he'd known she would make it. Her breath caught. How did you know it was me? I've been hoping it would be. There was something in his tone that made her chest tighten. Not relief exactly. More like satisfaction. I'm glad you called. Double quotes Lauren, realized she hadn't planned what to say. I wanted to ask about the job offer. If it's still available. It is. No hesitation. No doubt. When can you meet? When do you need me to? Now if possible. I know you just finished your shift, but I'd like to discuss the details while the offer is fresh in both our minds. He paused. Unless you need time to rest. I don't want to push if you're not ready. The consideration in his voice was almost more surprising than the job offer itself. When was the last time someone had cared if she was ready, If she was rested, if she needed time. No, Lauren said quickly. Now is fine. Where should I meet you? He gave her an address in the business district, one of the neighborhoods where Lauren usually felt distinctly out of place among the suits and the skyscrapers, and the people who walked like they owned the world. She wrote it down on the back of a receipt from her apron, her handwriting shaky. There's a coffee shop on the ground floor, Sebastian continued. Private booths in the back. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Okay, double quotes. Lauren's heart was pounding. I'll see you then. Lauren? His voice stopped her before she could hang up. You made the right choice. Calling me. How do you know? She asked quietly. Because you're still fighting, he said. And people who fight deserve a chance to win. The line went dead before she could respond. Lauren stood in the bathroom of the diner, staring at her phone, trying to process what was happening. This morning she'd been a struggling waitress with more problems than solutions. Now she was apparently meeting a mysterious wealthy man in a coffee shop to discuss a job she knew nothing about. This was either the best decision she'd ever made or the worst. She looked at herself in the mirror one more time. Exhausted, desperate, scared, but also, maybe, just a little bit hopeful. What's the worst that could happen? She whispered to her reflection. Then she grabbed her coat and headed out into the afternoon sun, toward an address in a part of the city where people like her usually didn't belong, to meet a man who'd seen something in her that she'd forgotten how to see in herself. Whatever happened next, at least she was moving forward. At least she was trying. The coffee shop was nothing like the diner. Where the diner was loud and chaotic and smelled like grease and desperation, this place was quiet, refined, with an atmosphere that whispered money and exclusivity. The floors were polished hardwood. The lighting was warm and subtle. Soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. The patrons sat in plush leather chairs, working on expensive laptops or having hushed conversations over drinks that probably cost more than Lauren made in tips all day. She felt immediately, overwhelmingly out of place. Her jeans were old and worn. Her coat had a stain on the sleeve from last week when she'd helped a drunk customer outside. Her shoes were practical but shabby, the kind you wore when you spent 12 hours a day on your feet and couldn't afford to care about fashion. She probably still smelled like the diner, coffee and grease and exhaustion. Everyone here looked like they belonged. Like they'd never questioned whether they had the right to take up space in a place like this. Lauren almost turned around and left. But then she saw him. Sebastian sat in a booth at the back, exactly where he'd said he'd be. He'd changed out of the coffee-stained suit and now wore a different one, charcoal gray, equally expensive, perfectly tailored to his tall frame. His dark hair was still combed back, still perfect, like chaos and disorder simply didn't apply to him. He was reading something on his phone, his expression focused and unreadable. He looked up as she approached, and something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but a softening, recognition. Lauren. He stood as she reached the booth, actually stood, like this was a business meeting and not a conversation with a broke waitress he'd met that morning. Thank you for coming. Thanks for offering to meet. The words felt awkward in her mouth. She wasn't used to this kind of formal courtesy. Please sit. He gestured to the booth, waiting until she'd slid in before sitting across from her. The booth was private, separated from the rest of the coffee shop by frosted glass panels that created an illusion of intimacy. Would you like something to drink? Coffee, tea? Lauren almost laughed at the irony of him offering her coffee after what had happened that morning, but she caught herself. Just water is fine. Sebastian signaled a server. A young man in a crisp black uniform who appeared immediately, took the order and disappeared without a word. The kind of service that was invisible until you needed it. The kind Lauren had spent years providing for others but had never experienced herself. How are you feeling? Sebastian asked once they were alone again. His dark eyes studied her face with that same intense focus from before. You look tired. I am tired, Lauren admitted. But that's nothing new. It should be. There was something in his voice, not quite anger, but something harder than concern. No one should have to work the way you do just to survive. That's how it is for people like me. It doesn't have to be. He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table between them. That's why I wanted to meet with you. To offer you something better. The server returned with water for Lauren and what looked like espresso for Sebastian. He thanked the young man quietly, then waited until they were alone again before continuing. I told you this morning that I own several businesses, he said. That was ... simplified. I run a private consulting firm. We handle delicate situations for clients who require discretion and results. Lauren's stomach tightened. What kind of situations? Security. Information. Problem solving. His gaze never left hers. Nothing illegal. Nothing that would put you in danger. But it requires intelligence, discretion, and the ability to read people and situations accurately. I'm a waitress, Lauren said slowly. I don't have experience in consulting or security or... You have exactly the experience I need. Sebastian's voice was firm. You've spent years reading people, anticipating their needs, managing difficult situations, staying calm under pressure. Those are valuable skills. Those are survival skills. Exactly. He took a sip of his espresso. The people who work for me aren't Ivy League graduates with MBAs and no real-world experience. They're people who've learned to survive, who understand how the world actually works, who can think on their feet and adapt to changing circumstances. People like you. Lauren wanted to believe him, but it sounded too good, too easy. What would I actually be doing? Initially, research and analysis. I'd need you to gather information, compile reports, identify patterns. Later, if you're interested and capable, there could be opportunities for field work, accompanying clients, managing situations, representing the firm in delicate negotiations. And you think I could do that? Based on watching me spill coffee and have a panic attack? I think you could do that based on watching you take responsibility for a mistake, try to protect yourself from consequences you couldn't afford, and then have the courage to call a stranger and ask for details on an offer that probably seemed too good to be true. His expression was serious. That shows character, Lauren, intelligence, survival instinct. Those matter more than any degree. The server appeared again with a small plate of pastries, set them on the table and vanished. Lauren stared at the food. Delicate, expensive-looking things that probably cost more than her dinner budget for a week. I know you're skeptical. Sebastian continued. You should be. Anyone who wasn't would be naive, and naive isn't what I need. So let me make this concrete. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and turned the screen toward her. It was a contract. Lauren scanned the first page, her eyes catching on numbers that made her breath stop. That's the starting salary, Sebastian said. Paid bi-weekly, full health insurance, dental, vision. 2 weeks paid vacation after 6 months, 4 weeks after a year. Performance bonuses quarterly based on results. Lauren stared at the number. It was more than double what she made now. Maybe triple, depending on tips. It was the kind of money that meant not worrying about rent, not skipping meals to save money, not lying awake at night calculating how many shifts she needed to cover an unexpected expense. It was the kind of money that meant security. This can't be real, she whispered. It's very real. Sebastian pulled the phone back. I don't make offers I don't intend to honor. If you accept this position, you'll start Monday. I'll provide training, resources, support. You'll have a desk, a company phone, access to the databases and systems you'll need. And you'll have me as a resource if you need guidance or have questions. Why? The question burst out of Lauren before she could stop it. Why me? You could hire anyone. Someone with experience, with connections, with... I told you this morning. You remind me of someone. Sebastian's expression darkened slightly, something painful flickering across his face before he controlled it. Someone who needed a chance and didn't get one. I can't fix that. But I can give you what she should have had. There was a story there, something heavy and unresolved. Lauren could see it in the tension of his shoulders, in the way his jaw tightened, in the carefully controlled emotion in his voice. Who was she? Lauren asked quietly. Someone important. He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone made it clear he wouldn't. The point is, I see potential in you that you don't see in yourself. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to discover it. Lauren looked down at the water glass in her hands. watching condensation bead on the surface. This was everything she'd been hoping for. A real job with a real salary and real benefits. A way out of the endless cycle of exhaustion and barely scraping by. A chance at something better. But it was also terrifying. What if she failed? What if she wasn't actually capable of what he thought she could do? What if she took this job and proved that she was exactly what she'd always feared? Not special, not talented, just barely adequate at surviving and nothing more. I'm scared, she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. Good. Sebastian's voice was gentle. Fear means you understand the stakes. It means you'll take this seriously. People who aren't scared make mistakes born of overconfidence. He paused. But don't let fear stop you from taking a risk that could change your life. How do you know it will change my life? Because I'm very good at reading people, Lauren. And I know potential when I see it. His dark eyes held hers. The question isn't whether you're capable. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out. The words hit her like a challenge, like a dare. Like the universe asking her a question she'd been avoiding for years. Do you want to just survive, or do you want to actually live? Lauren thought about the diner. About Glenn's casual cruelty. About customers who treated her like she was invisible. About the constant exhaustion, the stress, the fear of one wrong move meaning disaster. About lying awake at night, doing math in her head, calculating and recalculating. Trying to make numbers work that simply wouldn't. She thought about her life as it was now. Small, constrained, defined by limitations and lack, and the constant, grinding pressure of never being quite enough. And then she thought about what Sebastian was offering. Not just a job, not just money, but possibility. The chance to be more than what circumstance had forced her to become. The chance to discover who she could be if survival wasn't the only goal. She looked up and met his gaze. When did you say I could start? Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes. Satisfaction, approval, maybe even relief. Monday, 9 a.m. I'll send you the address and building information tonight. And if I ... double quotes, Lauren hesitated. If I can't do this, if I'm not what you think I am, then we'll figure that out together. His voice was firm. But I don't believe that's going to happen. I'm very rarely wrong about people. Lauren took a deep breath. This was insane. This was reckless. This was exactly the kind of impulsive decision she'd spent years trying to avoid, because impulsive decisions led to consequences she couldn't afford. But maybe, just maybe, not taking the risk was the bigger mistake. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Sebastian smiled then. A real smile. Small but genuine. That transformed his entire face from intimidatingly composed to almost warm. Good. I'll have the contract sent to you tonight. Read it carefully. Make sure you understand everything. And if you have questions, call me. I will. Lauren felt like she should say something more. Something profound or grateful or meaningful. But all she could manage was, thank you. For seeing something in me. Even if I don't see it yet. You will, Sebastian said with absolute certainty. Give it time. They talked for a while longer. Practical details about the job. About what she'd need, about schedules and expectations. Sebastian was thorough, professional. But there was something else underneath it all. Something that felt almost like investment. Like he wasn't just hiring her. Like he actually cared whether she succeeded. When they finally stood to leave, Lauren felt like she was floating. Exhaustion still weighed on her. But underneath it was something bright and fragile and terrifying. Hope. Sebastian walked her to the door of the coffee shop, his hand hovering near her back, but not quite touching, protective without being possessive. Get some rest, he said. You look like you haven't slept properly in months. I haven't, Lauren admitted. Then tonight, I want you to do something for me. He looked down at her with those intense dark eyes. I want you to go home, take a hot shower, order food that you actually want to eat instead of what's cheapest, and sleep for as long as your body needs. No alarms. No worrying. Just rest. I can't afford to. Sebastian pulled out his wallet and handed her several bills. Consider it an advance on your first paycheck. Use it for food, for rest, for whatever you need to take care of yourself. When she hesitated, his voice became firmer. Please, Lauren. Let someone take care of you for once. The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. She took the money with trembling hands, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. But his expression was soft. Thank me when you realize what you're actually capable of. He held the door open for her, and Lauren stepped out into the afternoon sun. The city looked different somehow. Brighter, fuller of possibility. The same streets that had felt like a trap this morning now felt like a beginning. She turned back to look at Sebastian one more time. He stood in the doorway of the coffee shop, backlit by the warm interior light, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Monday, he said. 9 a.m. Don't be late. I won't be, Lauren promised. And as she walked away, toward the bus stop that would take her home, she realized something had fundamentally shifted. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, barely surviving, defined by exhaustion and limitation. She was someone with potential. Someone with a chance, someone who'd been seen. And for the first time in years, she felt like she might actually have a future worth fighting for. 3 weeks into the job, Lauren's life had transformed in ways she was still struggling to process. She had an office with her name on the door. A salary that meant security instead of constant panic. Work that challenged her mind instead of just exhausting her body. And Sebastian, composed, intense, impossibly observant Sebastian, who pushed her to be better while also making her feel capable of rising to every challenge. The work itself was fascinating. She spent her days analyzing patterns in financial records, building profiles of potential clients, learning to see the subtle tells that distinguish legitimate business from carefully hidden fraud. It was like solving puzzles, and she was good at it. Better than she'd expected. Better than she'd ever imagined she could be at anything. But Sebastian was becoming a problem. Not because he was a bad boss. Quite the opposite. He was attentive without being overbearing, demanding but fair, quick to recognize good work and patient when she made mistakes. He pushed her to excel while also ensuring she didn't burn herself out the way she had at the diner. The problem was that Lauren was starting to see him as more than just her boss. She noticed things she shouldn't notice. The way his voice dropped slightly when he was focused. The rare smiles that transformed his entire face. The careful control he maintained over every gesture, every word, like he was constantly aware of the power he held and determined not to abuse it. She noticed how he always made sure she'd eaten lunch. How he'd quietly adjusted her workload when he saw she was overwhelmed. How he listened when she talked like her thoughts actually mattered. She noticed the moments when his mask slipped and she caught glimpses of something deeper. Pain, loneliness, a carefully guarded vulnerability he rarely let anyone see. And she was absolutely not supposed to be noticing any of that. On Thursday afternoon, Diana knocked on Lauren's office door. Sebastian wants to see you. Lauren saved her work and headed to his office, trying to ignore the way her heart sped up slightly at the prospect of seeing him. It was just a work meeting. That was all. Sebastian was at his desk, reviewing something on his computer. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted, softening in a way that made her chest tight. Lauren, close the door and sit down. She did, suddenly nervous. Is everything okay? I have a situation, Sebastian began. And I need someone I trust to handle it. He leaned back in his chair. A client meeting tomorrow evening. High-stakes negotiation with someone who's proven difficult in the past. I need someone there who can read the room, catch things I might miss while I'm focused on the negotiation itself. Someone observant and smart who won't be intimidated by aggressive tactics. And you want me to do that? I think you're ready. His dark eyes held hers. You've proven you can analyze situations quickly and accurately. Now I need to see if you can do it in real time, under pressure. Lauren's stomach flipped with nerves and excitement. What would I need to do? Mostly observe, take notes. Watch body language, listen to tone, pay attention to what's not being said. Sebastian's voice was calm, steady. If you notice anything concerning, you'll let me know. Otherwise, you're there as support. They spent the next hour going over details. What to expect, what to watch for, how to signal him if she noticed something important. Sebastian was thorough, methodical, making sure she felt prepared without overwhelming her. One more thing, he said as she was getting up to leave. The meeting is at a restaurant. Formal, you'll need appropriate attire. Lauren's stomach sank. I don't really have formal clothes. I figured. He pulled out his wallet and handed her a credit card. Use this. Get what you need. Dress, shoes, whatever makes you feel confident. No budget. I can't. You can and you will. His voice was firm. This is a work expense, Lauren. You need to look the part, and that's my responsibility to provide for. Don't argue. Lauren took the card reluctantly. This feels like too much. It's not. Sebastian's gaze was steady. You're representing my firm. That means you should have the resources to do it properly. He paused. And you deserve nice things. Stop acting like you don't. The words hit harder than they should have. Lauren had spent so long just trying to survive that the idea of deserving anything beyond basic necessities felt foreign. Thank you, she said quietly. You're welcome. Now go. And Lauren? She looked back. Get something you feel good in. Confidence matters as much as competence in these situations. The next evening, Lauren stood in her bathroom wearing the navy silk dress she'd found at an upscale boutique, feeling like a different person. Or maybe like the person she was supposed to be. Sebastian had arranged for a car to pick her up. The restaurant was elegant, exclusive, the kind of place she'd only seen in movies. And when she walked in and saw Sebastian waiting for her in that perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, the way his eyes found hers and something flickered across his face. Her breath caught. Lauren. He crossed to her, his voice dropping lower. You look stunning. Thank you. She was proud her voice came out steady. You clean up pretty well yourself. That got a small smile. I try. They sat, and Sebastian briefed her on the client. Marcus Volkov, wealthy and ruthless, with a business proposal that had raised red flags. I need to know if this is legitimate before I commit. Trust your instincts. When Volkov arrived, Lauren immediately understood why Sebastian had been cautious. The man was intimidating. Predatory in a way that was entirely intentional. He looked at Lauren with an assessment that made her skin crawl, not sexual, but calculating. Like he was already figuring out how to use her as leverage. As the meeting progressed, Lauren noticed everything Sebastian had trained her to see. The inconsistencies in Volkov's story. The body language that didn't match his words. The way he kept testing Sebastian, asking questions designed to probe for weaknesses. When Volkov excused himself for a phone call, Sebastian leaned in. What do you think? He's lying, Lauren said quietly. About something major. The story doesn't add up. And I think he's dangerous. Agreed. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Good instincts, Lauren. By the time dessert arrived, Sebastian had politely but firmly declined Volkov's case. The man left with veiled implications that it would be unfortunate to have him disappointed. That was dangerous, Lauren said once they were alone. Very. Sebastian's voice was tight with controlled anger, not at her, but at the situation. He's involved in something criminal. Your assessment saved us from a federal investigation. In the car taking her home, the adrenaline finally caught up to Lauren. Her hands trembled slightly, and Sebastian noticed immediately. He always noticed. You did well tonight, he said quietly. Better than well. You were exactly what I needed. I was terrified. I know. But you didn't show it. That's what matters. He looked at her, and in the dim light, his expression was softer than usual. I'm proud of you, Lauren. The words made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. When they reached her building, Sebastian walked her to the door. If you ever feel unsafe, in a meeting, at the office, anywhere, you tell me immediately. Understood? Understood. Good. He held her gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them. Good night, Lauren. She watched him return to the car, watched it pull away. Then she went inside, collapsed on her couch still wearing the beautiful dress, and tried not to think about the fact that her boss was becoming increasingly difficult to see as just a boss. Monday morning, Lauren arrived at the office to find a message from Diana, asking her to see Sebastian immediately. Her stomach flipped nervously. Had something happened with Volkov? Sebastian's door was open. He waved her in, gesturing for her to sit. He ended his phone call and turned his full attention to her. Good morning. Morning. Lauren's hands twisted in her lap. Diana said you wanted to see me? I did. Sebastian leaned back, and something in his expression softened. Update on the Volkov situation. My contacts confirmed your assessment was correct. He's under federal investigation for multiple financial crimes. If we'd taken his case, we'd be under scrutiny right now. He pulled an envelope from his desk. Your performance bonus. Significantly larger this time, because the value you provided was significantly larger. Lauren took the envelope with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the weight of it. You've earned it, Lauren. Stop questioning whether you deserve the rewards of your own competence. His voice was gentle but firm. You're good at this. You're valuable. Accept it. She looked up at him. This man who'd seen something in her that she hadn't been able to see in herself, who'd given her a chance when no one else would have, who pushed her to be better while making her feel capable of rising to every challenge. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For hiring me, for trusting me, for seeing me. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression, his professional mask cracking to reveal something deeper underneath. You were always worth seeing, Lauren. The problem was never you. It was that no one was looking. The air between them felt charged suddenly. Lauren should leave, should maintain professional boundaries. But she couldn't seem to move. Can I ask you something? The words escaped before she could stop them. Anything. Who was she? The person I remind you of. Sebastian's expression darkened immediately, pain flickering across his face. For a moment, Lauren thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my sister. His voice was low, carefully controlled. Alina. She was brilliant, capable, stronger than anyone I've ever known. But our father broke her down, made her feel worthless. By the time I was in a position to help her, it was too late. She'd internalized everything he'd said. He stopped, jaw tightening. She died 5 years ago, not physically at first. But she stopped fighting. Stopped believing anything could be better. I'm sorry, Lauren whispered. Don't be sorry. Just promise me you'll keep fighting. That you won't let anyone, including yourself, convince you that you're not enough. I promise. Sebastian stood, coming around the desk, suddenly close enough that Lauren could see the intensity in his dark eyes. The control it took to maintain his composure. The carefully guarded emotion underneath. Lauren, I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen without interrupting. Her heart pounded. Okay, when I offered you this job, it was because I saw potential. Everything I said about your capabilities was true. He paused. But there was also something else. I'm attracted to you, Lauren. I have been since that morning in the diner when you stood in the rain looking terrified and determined. But I will never act on that attraction if it makes you uncomfortable or compromises your position. Your job is secure regardless. This firm, this opportunity, it's yours, whether anything personal happens between us or not. Lauren couldn't breathe. I need you to know that, Sebastian continued. You have power in this situation. You get to decide what happens next, and whatever you decide, I'll respect it. The honesty in his voice, the careful way he was handling this, the respect he was showing her, it made her chest ache. What if ... double quotes, Lauren's voice was barely above a whisper. What if I feel the same way? Sebastian's breath caught. Do you? I don't know, she said honestly. You're my boss. You gave me this opportunity. I don't want to risk that. Then we don't make things complicated. His voice was firm. We keep this professional. We maintain boundaries. And in a few months, when you're more established, we can revisit this. If you want to. It was the right answer. The professional answer. But Lauren found herself stepping closer anyway. What if I don't want to wait? Sebastian's eyes darkened. Lauren, I'm not saying I want to rush into anything. But I'm tired of always being careful, always protecting myself from possibilities because they might be complicated. You took a chance on me. Maybe it's time I took a chance too. This is different. I know, but you see me, Sebastian. Really see me. Not just what I can do, but who I am. And I see you too. The person underneath all this control. The one still carrying pain. The one who's lonely even though he's surrounded by success. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. Then, carefully, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The first time he'd ever touched her beyond a professional handshake. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "If we do this," Sebastian said quietly, "we do it slowly, carefully, no rushing, no pressure. We communicate constantly about boundaries. Agreed?" "Agreed. And your job stays your job. Your success stays your success. This doesn't impact that. Ever." "I understand." His hand moved to cup her cheek gently. "Then let me be clear. I care about you, Lauren. More than is probably wise. And I want to see where this goes, if you're willing to find out with me." Lauren leaned into his touch, feeling safe in a way she hadn't in years. "I'm willing." Sebastian smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Then we'll figure it out together." He stepped back, professional boundaries reasserting but with new understanding underneath. Lauren felt it. Possibility, connection, the beginning of something extraordinary. "Now," Sebastian said, his voice shifting back to business. "We should probably get back to work before Diana starts wondering." Lauren laughed. Probably wise. But as she turned to leave, Sebastian's voice stopped her. "Lauren?" She looked back. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being brave enough to take chances. Thank you for being worth taking chances on." She left his office and returned to her own, settling at her desk with work to do and a future that suddenly felt wide open. A month ago, she'd been a waitress spilling coffee on a stranger's expensive suit, terrified and exhausted and barely holding it together. Now she was someone with a career she was good at, financial security she'd never imagined, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something real with a man who saw her for exactly who she was. Lauren opened her laptop and got to work, a small smile playing at her lips. Life had a funny way of changing when you were brave enough to let it.